The blazing Arizona sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of Promise Creek as Gabriella Ainsworth clutched her tattered valise to her chest, the whispers following her like vultures circling overhead. The year was 1875, and Promise Creek was a town with a long memory and little forgiveness for women who didn't fit their narrow view of propriety. "There she goes," a woman hissed from beneath a lace parasol, the schoolteacher who threw herself at a married man. Gabriella quickened her pace, the hem of her once fine blue dress dragging in the dirt. 3 weeks ago, she had been the respected schoolteacher of Promise Creek. Now she was nothing but a scandal wrapped in calico, seeking a place to rest her head for the night. The accusations had come swift and merciless. The banker's wife had claimed Gabriella had tried to seduce her husband. It wasn't true Mr. Hollister had cornered Gabriella in the schoolhouse after hours, his unwanted advances leaving her with a torn sleeve and a ruined reputation when his wife walked in at precisely the wrong moment. No one believed Gabriella's side of the story. Not the town council that dismissed her, not the landlady who evicted her, and certainly not the townspeople who crossed the street to avoid her passing. The only establishment that would likely take her in was the Last Chance Saloon at the edge of town. Even the thought made her stomach turn, but she had nowhere else to go, and night was falling. As she approached the swinging doors, raucous laughter spilled out into the street along with the tinny sounds of a poorly tuned piano. Gabriella paused, gathering what little courage remained to her. Just as she reached for the door, a commotion from down the street caught her attention. A man on horseback was approaching, his black stallion kicking up dust as it trotted into town. The rider sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was no mistaking the confident posture of a man who knew his way around the frontier. Gabriella stepped aside as the stranger dismounted in front of the general store, tying his horse to the post. Something about his unhurried movements made her pause. He wasn't like the cowhands who occasionally stormed through town looking for whiskey and women. This man moved with purpose. When he turned, she caught sight of his face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. He nodded politely as he passed her, the gesture so unexpected that she nearly dropped her valise. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice deep and steady like distant thunder. "Good evening," she replied automatically, the social graces ingrained in her since childhood briefly overcoming her current circumstances. He paused, taking a closer look at her, and Gabriella felt herself shrink under his scrutiny. Would he too recognize her as the fallen schoolteacher? But his eyes held no judgment, only a mild curiosity. "You look like you could use a meal," he said simply. "The dining room at the hotel still serving supper," Gabriella's face flushed. "I wouldn't know, they don't welcome me there anymore." Understanding dawned in his eyes, but still no judgment. "I see. Well, I haven't eaten since breakfast, and I don't much care for drinking my dinner. Would you join me at the cafe down the street? I hear Mrs. Wilson makes a fine beef stew." "I couldn't possibly," Gabriella began, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Name's Samuel Dawson. Most folks call me Sam. Gabriella Ainsworth," she replied hesitantly. "Well, Miss Ainsworth, I'd consider it a favor if you'd help a stranger find a decent meal in this town." His kindness nearly undid her. After weeks of scorn and whispers, a simple act of decency from a stranger felt like water in the desert. "Mr. Dawson, you don't understand." "I can't be seen with you. The talk, let them talk," he said with a shrug. "I never did put much stock in gossip." Before she could protest further, he gestured toward the small cafe at the end of the street. "After you, Miss Ainsworth." Against her better judgment, Gabriella found herself walking beside him. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople burning into her back, the whispers already starting. Tomorrow, Samuel Dawson would be included in the scandal that surrounded her. The cafe was nearly empty when they entered, but the few patrons there fell silent at the sight of Gabriella. Mrs. Wilson emerged from the kitchen, her welcoming smile faltering when she saw who accompanied Mr. Dawson. "Evening, madam," Sam said, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "I hear you serve the best stew in 3 counties. Table for two, if you please." Mrs. Wilson hesitated, looking between them. "Mr. Dawson, perhaps you don't know I'm hungry, and so is the lady," he interrupted politely but firmly. "Now, about that table," reluctantly, Mrs. Wilson led them to a corner table, as far from the other diners as possible. Gabriella sat with her back to the room, unable to bear the stares. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered once Mrs. Wilson had gone to fetch their food. "Your reputation, my reputation can handle it," he said, removing his hat and placing it on the empty chair beside him. His hair was the color of dark walnut with strands of silver at the temples. "Been riding the frontier for 15 years. Takes more than a few wagging tongues to bother me." "Why would you help me?" Gabriella asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Men didn't offer kindness without expecting something in return. That was a lesson she'd learned well. Sam considered her question, his gray eyes thoughtful. "When I was 16, my sister was accused of something she didn't do. Nobody stood up for her, and she left town in the middle of the night, never saw her again." He looked directly at Gabriella. "I don't know your story, Miss Ainsworth, and I don't need to. But I know what it's like to be alone with the world against you." The simplicity of his explanation caught her off guard. Before she could respond, Mrs. Wilson returned with 2 bowls of steaming stew and a loaf of fresh bread. "Thank you, madam," Sam said, sliding a coin across the table. Mrs. Wilson hesitated. "Miss Ainsworth, I'm sorry about all this. Thomas wanted to ban you outright, but I told him it's all right." "Mrs. Wilson," Gabriella interrupted, not wanting to hear the woman's justifications for treating her like a pariah while still taking her money. "The stew smells wonderful." As they ate, Sam told her about his work as a horse trader, traveling between Texas and California, buying and selling stock for ranches and army outposts. He spoke of wide, open spaces and star-filled nights, of mountains that touched the sky and deserts that stretched to the horizon. "And what about you, Miss Ainsworth?" he asked as they finished their meal. "What's your story?" Gabriella stared into her empty bowl. "I was the schoolteacher here. Until 3 weeks ago. And now I'm—" Her throat tightened. "I don't know what I am," Sam nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to give. "Where are you staying tonight?" The question brought her back to her immediate problem. I'm not sure." "I was hoping the saloon might have a room," his brow furrowed. "The last chance is no place for a lady." "I'm not much of a lady anymore, Mr. Dawson, at least according to this town." "This town doesn't get to decide that," he said firmly. "There's a boarding house on the edge of town. The widow Fletcher runs it. She's fair-minded and doesn't listen to gossip. Mrs. Fletcher won't take me in. I already tried." Sam frowned. "Then I'll speak with her." "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. They left the cafe together, the night air cooling Gabriella's flushed cheeks. The boardwalk was mostly deserted now, the town settling in for the evening. As they walked toward the boarding house, Gabriella felt a strange mix of hope and trepidation. Hope that she might have found an ally, trepidation at what that might cost her and him. Mrs. Fletcher answered the door on the third knock, her wrinkled face registering surprise at seeing Gabriella standing beside Sam Dawson. "Evening, Mrs. Fletcher," Sam said, tipping his hat. "I understand you have rooms to let." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "I do, Mr. Dawson, but I run a respectable establishment. Then you'll have no objection to renting a room to Miss Ainsworth here. She's in need of lodging." "I already told her, Mrs. Fletcher," Sam interrupted gently. "I've known Miss Ainsworth's family for years. Fine, God-fearing people from Virginia. Whatever you've heard about her, I can assure you it's not the truth." Gabriella glanced at him, startled by the lie. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. "Is that so, Mrs. Fletcher?" looked dubious. "Yes, madam. Her father and mine served together in the war. When I heard she was teaching out here, I promised I'd look in on her. Now I find her reputation in tatters over a misunderstanding." Mrs. Fletcher wavered. Mr. Hollister's wife was quite clear about what she saw. "Mrs. Hollister saw what her husband wanted her to see," Sam said firmly. "Now, about that room." After a long moment, Mrs. Fletcher stepped aside. "Second floor, end of the hall, $5 a week in advance." Sam reached into his pocket and produced the money. "Thank you kindly." As they climbed the stairs, Gabriella whispered, "You didn't have to lie for me." Sometimes a small untruth serves a greater good, he replied. Besides, how do you know I'm not from Virginia? Despite everything, Gabriella found herself smiling. Because your accent is pure Texas, he chuckled. Can't fool a schoolteacher, I suppose. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Gabriella set her valise on the bed, suddenly aware of how alone they were. I'll let you get settled, Sam said, sensing her discomfort. I'm staying at the hotel if you need anything. Mr. Dawson, Gabriella called as he turned to leave. Thank you, I don't know how I'll ever repay you. No need for that, he said. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't let them convince you you're something you're not. With a tip of his hat, he was gone. Gabriella sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling. For the first time in weeks, someone had treated her with kindness and respect. It was like a cool drink after a long thirst, both relieving and almost painful in its intensity. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but for tonight, she had a safe place to sleep, and the memory of someone who had stood up for her when no one else would. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Gabriella dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a green calico that had seen better days but was still presentable. She had no idea what the day would bring, but she was determined to face it with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Fletcher was in the kitchen when Gabriella came downstairs, kneading dough with strong, wrinkled hands. There's coffee on the stove, the older woman said without looking up, and biscuits in the warming oven. Thank you, Gabriella replied, surprised by the offer of breakfast. Your friend, Mr. Dawson, came by earlier, Mrs. Fletcher continued, punching the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. Said to tell you he'll be at the livery stable most of the day if you need him. Gabriella nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Mrs. Fletcher, I want you to know that whatever you've heard about me, girl, I've lived in this town for 30 years. I know Thomas Hollister for the snake he is. Mrs. Fletcher finally looked up. Should have spoken up sooner, but fear's a powerful thing. When Mr. Dawson stood his ground last night, made me ashamed of myself. Gabriella blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me. I'm still charging you full price for the room. But there was a hint of a smile on the older woman's face. Now eat something. You're thin as a rail. After breakfast, Gabriella stepped out onto the porch, uncertain of her next move. She needed to find work, but who would hire her now? The school board had made it clear she would never teach again, at least not in this territory. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Samuel Dawson rode toward the boarding house, his black stallion moving at an easy trot. He reined in at the gate and dismounted in one fluid motion. Morning, Miss Ainsworth, he called, tipping his hat. Thought you might like to see something. What is it? There's a homestead for sale just outside town. Owners heading back east. Place needs work, but the land's good. Mr. Dawson, I can't afford a piece of paper, let alone a homestead, he shrugged. Just thought you might like to see something beyond these town walls. Unless you have pressing business, Gabriella hesitated. The idea of leaving town, even temporarily, was appealing. I don't have a horse. Old Thunder here can carry double, if you don't mind riding behind me. The impropriety of such an arrangement would have shocked her a few weeks ago. Now, it seemed a minor concern compared to everything else she had endured. Let me get my shawl. The ride out of town was both terrifying and exhilarating. Gabriella had never ridden behind a man before, and the intimacy of holding onto Sam's waist made her face burn. But once they cleared the town limits, the open landscape stretching before them like a painting, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The homestead was about 3 miles outside Promise Creek, nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it. The cabin was weathered but sound, with a small barn and corral beside it. Fields that had once been cultivated were now overgrown, but Gabriella could see the potential. It's beautiful, she said as Sam helped her down from the horse. Belongs to a man named Jenkins. His wife died last winter, and he's taking their children back to Missouri to live with her family. Sam led the way to the cabin. He's asking a fair price. It doesn't matter what he's asking. I have exactly $12.43 to my name. Sam pushed open the cabin door. The interior was simple, one large room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, and a bed in the corner. A ladder led to a small loft. Jenkins left most of the furniture, Sam commented. Said it wasn't worth hauling back east. Mr. Dawson, Gabriella said, suspicion growing, why are you showing me this? He leaned against the doorframe, studying her. Because I think you need a fresh start away from those town gossips. And how exactly am I supposed to afford this fresh start? I've been thinking about that. He straightened up, suddenly looking almost boyish in his enthusiasm. I need someone to look after my business interests in this area. I'm tired of traveling, Miss Ainsworth. Been thinking about settling down, establishing a permanent base for my horse trading. Gabriella crossed her arms. Are you offering me a job, in a manner of speaking? I'd buy this place, stock it with horses. You'd manage it while I'm traveling, keep the books, handle local sales. I'd teach you everything you need to know about horses. And what would people say about such an arrangement? A single woman living on a property owned by a single man. Sam had the grace to look chagrined. I hadn't thought of that, clearly. We could say you're my cousin, he suggested, or my sister. More lies, Mr. Dawson. He ran a hand through his hair. You're right, it wouldn't work. Gabriella turned away, trying to hide her disappointment. For a moment, she had allowed herself to hope. Unless, Sam said slowly, we weren't single, she whirled around. What? It's just a thought, he said hastily. A business arrangement. On paper, we'd be married, but in reality, you'd be my business partner. You'd have your reputation back, a place to live and work that uses your intelligence. You can't be serious, Gabriella breathed. Marriage isn't something to be entered into lightly, Mr. Dawson, even as a business arrangement. I'm 38 years old, Miss Ainsworth, been on my own since I was 16, never found a woman who wanted the life I led. His gaze was steady. I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give, just a partnership, a chance for both of us to build something. Gabriella's head spun. This is madness, we barely know each other. I know you're intelligent, resourceful, and undeserving of what this town has done to you, Sam replied. You know I'm honest and reasonably successful. We can learn the rest as we go. And if it doesn't work out, then we dissolve the partnership, no hard feelings. I'll make sure you're provided for. Gabriella walked to the window, looking out at the land. It was beautiful, peaceful in a way Promise Creek could never be for her now. But marriage, even in name only, I need time to think, she finally said. Of course, no rush. Sam moved toward the door. I'll take you back to town. The ride back was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the boarding house, Sam helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. I'll be in town for a few more days, he said. Take all the time you need, Gabriella nodded, unable to find the words to express the tumult of emotions within her. She watched him ride away, wondering if she was considering his proposal because it was sensible or because there was something about Samuel Dawson that made her feel safe for the first time in years. That evening, as she sat in her room at Mrs. Fletcher's, a commotion in the street drew her to the window. Thomas Hollister, the banker whose unwanted advances had started all her troubles, was arguing loudly with Samuel Dawson outside the saloon. Gabriella couldn't hear their words, but the tension in their postures was clear. Hollister jabbed a finger at Sam's chest, his face red with anger. Sam stood his ground, calm but unyielding. Suddenly, Hollister swung at Sam, a wild, drunken punch that Sam easily sidestepped. In one fluid motion, Sam grabbed Hollister's arm, twisted it behind his back, and marched him toward the sheriff's office. A crowd had gathered, and Gabriella could see Mrs. Hollister among them, her face a mask of fury. Gabriella stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. Whatever had happened, she was certain it involved her. An hour later, a knock at her door confirmed her fears. Mrs. Fletcher stood there, her expression grim. Mr. Dawson's downstairs, she said, and he's got a shiner that'll be purple by morning. Sam was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a wet cloth to his eye. He stood when Gabriella entered, wincing slightly. What happened? She demanded. Nothing serious, he assured her. Just a little misunderstanding with Mr. Hollister. About me, Sam hesitated, then nodded. He took exception to me helping you, said some things I couldn't let pass. So you fought him. Gabriella's voice rose in distress. That will only make things worse. I didn't fight him. I restrained him when he tried to hit me, and I escorted him to the sheriff. Sam lowered the cloth, revealing a swelling around his left eye. This happened after when his friends caught up to me behind the saloon. "Oh, Sam," Gabriella breathed, forgetting formality in her concern. She took the cloth from him and dipped it in fresh, cold water. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Now you're caught up in my scandal." "It was my choice," he said, wincing as she pressed the cloth to his eye. And it was worth it to see the look on Hollister's face when the sheriff made him admit what really happened at the schoolhouse. Gabriella froze. "What?" "Turns out our esteemed banker has a habit of cornering young women. Sheriff's been turning a blind eye because Hollister holds the mortgages on half the town. But when I mentioned that my brother is a federal marshal who might be interested in how justice is administered in Promise Creek, well, Sam smiled despite his swollen face. Hollister decided to clear his conscience. He confessed. Gabriella could hardly believe it. He did. And his wife heard every word. Sam reached up to touch Gabriella's hand where it held the cloth to his eye. "Your name's been cleared, Gabriella. The sheriff will make a public statement tomorrow." Tears welled in Gabriella's eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I couldn't stand to see you hurt." In that moment, looking into his storm-gray eyes, Gabriella realized that what had started as gratitude was becoming something deeper, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. "About your proposal," she said softly. "The business arrangement." "Yes, I've been thinking." She set the cloth aside, gathering her courage. "It wouldn't be fair to either of us." Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do," Gabriella continued. "I can't enter into a marriage of convenience with you, Sam, because my feelings are no longer convenient." He stared at her, confusion giving way to understanding. "Gabriella, let me finish," she said, her heart pounding. "I've spent 3 weeks being judged and condemned by people who don't know me, but you, a stranger, looked at me and saw someone worth defending. How could I not begin to care for you?" Sam stood, closing the distance between them. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that if you still want to propose a partnership, I'd like it to be real, not just on paper." Gabriella took a deep breath. "But I need to know if that's something you could want too." For a moment, Sam was silent, and Gabriella feared she had misread everything. Then he reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "When I rode into Promise Creek, I was just passing through," he said quietly. "Never expected to find a reason to stay, but there you were, standing tall despite everything, and something in me recognized something in you." He squeezed her hands. "I proposed that arrangement because I didn't dare hope for more, didn't think a lady like you could ever see a rough trader like me as more than a convenient solution to a problem. You're not a solution, Sam. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like I matter." He raised a hand to her cheek, his touch feather light. "You matter, Gabriella, more than you know." When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, as if he still couldn't believe she wanted this. Gabriella answered by leaning into him, her hands finding the front of his shirt, anchoring herself as the world seemed to shift beneath her feet. "Well, it's about time," Mrs. Fletcher's voice broke them apart. The older woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed but a smile tugging at her lips. "Was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out." Gabriella felt her face flush, but Sam just laughed. "Mrs. Fletcher, I was hoping to do this with a bit more dignity, but since you're here." He turned back to Gabriella, taking both her hands in his. "Gabriella Ainsworth, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience, not for appearances, but because I think we could build something real together." "Yes," Gabriella whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I will, Mrs." Fletcher sniffed, wiping her eyes with her apron. "Lord have mercy, now you've got me crying. First wedding we've had in Promise Creek in 2 years, and it had to start with a black eye." The next morning, the sheriff made his announcement on the steps of the courthouse. Thomas Hollister stood beside him, his face a study in humiliation as the truth was finally revealed. Mrs. Hollister was notably absent, having left on the morning stage to stay with her sister in Denver. Gabriella stood at the edge of the crowd, Sam's arm around her shoulders. The townspeople who had shunned her now looked at her with varying degrees of shame and contrition. Some, like Mrs. Wilson from the cafe, approached to offer apologies. Others couldn't meet her eyes. "How does it feel," Sam asked quietly, "to be vindicated?" Less satisfying than I thought it would be, Gabriella admitted. I don't want their apologies, I just want to move forward. Then that's what we'll do. He squeezed her shoulder. I spoke with Jenkins this morning. The homestead is ours if we want it. Our home, Gabriella said, testing the words. It needs curtains and books. And horses, Sam added with a grin. Lots of horses. As they walked away from the courthouse, leaving the gossip and judgment behind, Gabriella caught sight of a group of women watching them, whispering behind their hands. For a moment, the old fear gripped her. What were they saying now? Then Sam's hand found hers, warm and steady, and she realized it didn't matter anymore. Whatever they said couldn't touch her. They're still talking, she murmured. Let them, Sam replied. We know the truth. One of the women broke away from the group, approaching them with determination. It was Martha Sinclair, the preacher's wife and one of the most influential women in town. Miss Ainsworth, she said stiffly, I owe you an apology, we all do. Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair, Gabriella replied, surprised by the woman's directness. The ladies' auxiliary is meeting this afternoon. We would be honored if you would join us. We're discussing reopening the school and we find ourselves in need of a teacher. Gabriella felt Sam's questioning gaze. This was what she had wanted: her position back, her reputation restored, but something had changed. That's very kind, Mrs. Sinclair, she said carefully, but I'm afraid I have other plans. Mr. Dawson and I are to be married and will be living on the old Jenkins place. Mrs. Sinclair's eyes widened. I see. Well, congratulations are in order then. She glanced between them, clearly recalculating her assessment. Perhaps you might consider teaching part-time. The children have missed you. I'll think about it, Gabriella promised, though she already knew her answer. She wanted a fresh start, not a return to what had been. As Mrs. Sinclair walked away, Sam looked down at her. You sure about this? You love teaching? I do, Gabriella agreed, and maybe someday I'll teach again. But right now I want to learn about horses and homesteading and being a wife. She squeezed his hand. Our life is waiting, Sam. I don't want to look back anymore. They were married 2 days later in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor with the widow herself and the preacher as witnesses. Gabriella wore her best dress, freshly pressed with wildflowers in her hair. Sam wore a new shirt purchased from the general store, his boots polished to a shine. The ceremony was simple, the words ancient and binding. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Sam kissed her with such tenderness that Mrs. Fletcher sniffled loudly into her handkerchief. Their new home welcomed them that evening, the autumn sunset painting the little cabin in gold. Sam carried Gabriella across the threshold, both of them laughing at the formality of it. Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson, he said, setting her gently on her feet. It sounds strange, she admitted, but I like it. So do I. He kissed her again, no longer hesitant but still gentle, as if she were precious beyond measure. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Gabriella rested her head on Sam's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. When I came to Promise Creek 3 years ago, I thought I'd found my place in the world, she murmured. When they cast me out, I thought I'd lost everything. Sam's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. And now I know better. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her husband, this man who had ridden into her life when she needed him most. They said I'm a fallen woman, she whispered, echoing the words that had followed her through the streets of Promise Creek. Sam's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. Then let's fall together, he said, just as he had promised they would, every day for the rest of our lives. And in that moment, Gabriella knew that what had seemed like an ending had been only the beginning. The scandal that had nearly destroyed her had led her here, to this man, this home, this life that stretched before them full of promise. They had fallen, yes, fallen into love, into trust, into a future neither could have imagined just days before. And they would continue to fall together, through whatever joys and sorrows life might bring, bound by a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty street in Promise Creek.